If you've been listening to podcasts and interviews lately, surely you heard the argument that automation is going to replace people at work.
The computers are coming after your job.
What to do about mass unemployment? This is going to be a massive social challenge. There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better.
The danger here is to think of it as artificial intelligence is coming. It's actually already eating up the most common jobs in our economy.
It's unsettling to look into the future with a sense that you might not be needed anymore, that your agency and competence and identity can be stripped away from you. And it's easy to start to give in into fear and doubt, but personally this is not something I want to do, and nor do you, I assume, since you're watching this video. I think the best thing we can do is to try to make sense of what's going on and do our best to prepare ourselves to face whatever comes next. In the book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, historian Yuval Harari explains that the traditional framework we've been using to approach life is broken. It doesn't work anymore. And he writes, "From time immemorial, life was divided into two complementary parts, a period of learning followed by a period of working. In the first part of life, you accumulated information, developed skills, constructed a worldview, and built a stable identity. In the second part of life, you relied on your accumulated skills to navigate the world, earn a living, and contribute to society. However, he says, due to accelerating change and longer lifespans, this way of life is rapidly becoming obsolete."
This is the first time in human history that we have no idea how the world would look like in a very short time, let's say 20 years. I mean, predictions were never very accurate. And, if you live in the Middle Ages, you don't know what will happen in 20 years. Maybe the Vikings will invade, maybe the Mongols will invade, maybe there'll be a plague, an earthquake, all kinds of things could happen. But at least you know that the basic features of human life are going to be the same. You think, for example, about the job market, the skills you need. Then, I should teach my kids how to harvest wheat and bake bread and ride a horse, because even if the Mongols invade, and even if the Vikings come, and even if there is a plague and an earthquake, they would still need to harvest wheat and to ride a horse. So that's a safe bet. Now, we look 20 years to the future, we have no idea what the job market would look like and what skills people will need. The pace of change is accelerating.
So if the traditional framework to approach life is broken and doesn't work anymore, what replaces it? Are there things we can invest on and skills we can develop that will prove useful in the long term, no matter what the job market will look like? In his book, Harari gives 5 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice that Harari gives is to increase your mental and emotional resilience. Basically, he says, in a world where profound uncertainty is a feature and not a bug, you need to have a lot of mental flexibility and emotional balance. And what that means is that you have to constantly let go of what you know best and make yourself comfortable with the unfamiliar, with the unknown. A good example would be, and this is my comment, but the adoption of remote work that last year has been forced upon millions of people due to COVID-19. And some people adapted to it very fast and some others struggled and maybe are still struggling with it. And the point is that more challenges like that could come in the workplace, and we need to be able to deal with them much faster and much better in order to preserve our emotional balance and mental stability. And so it's really important to increase both our mental and emotional resilience. His second piece of advice is to develop a dynamic self-image. He says, because the job market is going to change so much, you cannot have a fixed idea of who you are and what job you should do. Instead, you should constantly learn new things and reinvent yourself over and over, and this regardless of your age. And this can be a challenge, of course. He says, if you're in your 50s, you don't really want to start from scratch and reinvent yourself and start a new job. Also, there are physical limitations because neuroplasticity decreases over time. However, if you want to stay relevant to the job market of the future, you have to let go of this idea that you'll learn something and now you apply it for the rest of your life, and embrace this other framework of, no, actually I need to learn constantly all the time and reinvent myself over and over again, and maybe have many different jobs throughout my career. The third piece of advice he gives is to strengthen the 4 C's, and those are skills in critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And the point is that in the future there will be less need for technical specific skills and more need for general purpose life skills that can be applied across many domains and many different contexts. And other examples of these skills can be, for example, networking, decision making, emotional intelligence, and so forth. The fourth piece of advice he gives is to trust your own judgment and to stop relying too much on the advice of the adults. Many young people today pick careers because their parents advise them to do so, or even if it's not that straightforward, they might stay in certain job because it gives them some status and it makes them look good in the eyes of their parents, and that makes the parents look good in the eyes of their friends. And even if there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, Harari says, be careful what you optimize for, because in the past, pleasing your parents and listening to your parents has always been a safe bet, in life, because the adults knew the world pretty well and the world changed very slowly. However, nowadays it's becoming more risky because the adults and your parents most likely don't understand the world anymore that well. They don't really understand where it's going. And so in this sense, you should really trust your intuition and make sense of the world on your own and trust your own judgment about your future, because ultimately tomorrow you will be responsible of the choices you make today and not your parents. The fifth and last piece of advice he gives is to know thyself. Basically, know who you are and what you want from life and how your brain works and what biases you have and what external forces you're subject to. This is going to be very important because in an increasingly chaotic and noisy world, if you know your inner world and how your operating system works, it's going to be a great strength to remain clear-minded, focused, balanced in order to face whatever challenge comes your way. As you probably realize, all this advice is really hard to implement, and all these skills are pretty hard to acquire. They require a lot of time and effort and patience, and also there is no single way to acquire them. You can develop them by moving abroad, by traveling, by seeking new experiences, immersing yourself in a new culture, starting a business, working in different industries. So compared to the previous model and previous framework and approach to life, which is very structured, there's a clear structure. You go to school, then you pick a major, you go to university, you get the degree, you get to do the job for the rest of your life. This framework is much more fluid and open and intangible in many ways. If you go travel for 3 years, at the end of it, you don't get a degree in emotional intelligence. However, developing that skill is going to have very tangible effects in your life, as well as for the other skills like mental resilience, decision making, and so forth. And ultimately, if you do take the time to invest in yourself and develop these qualities, even if the future will still be uncertain and the job market will still evolve in unpredictable ways, you can face it feeling much more empowered, much more competent, and much more strong in your sense of identity and who you are and what you want and what you're capable of. And that's gonna make a huge difference in your life. And so I hope this video was helpful. Let me know what you think of it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.